Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. This is the second of 3 episodes in which global futurist and metaverse strategist Sylvia Gallusser and I are exploring the future of media, news, and the identity economy. Last time, we explored the context of AI development, focusing on generative AI, then looked at the opportunities and risks for content creation through the lens of journalism. Today, we will dig deeper into the opportunities and challenges of using generative AI and look further into the future to explore 3 scenarios from 2050. So, Sylvia, welcome back. And I want to start this episode with a quote, because I think it plays really nicely into everything that we spoke about last time. And it's this. Alex Springer's CEO wrote in a company email, AI has the potential to make independent journalism better than it ever was, or simply replace it.
Wow.
So what are your thoughts on that before we go any further? Because that kind of describes the potential of these technologies, given how far we've developed, and actually we don't know how much further they could develop.
Absolutely. It captures very well the dilemma at play right now. And I would sort of say by that partial replacement has actually already started. And really, we see that news organizations have taken different positions in regard to using AI for writing content. And to give you a few examples, for example, the Associated Press has published AI-written financial stories since 2016, with the goal of giving reporters time to focus on in-depth reporting. The BBC has experimented with AI for local election updates. I'll briefly use an AI to write sports stories, and CNET announced it was pausing its program to write stories using AI after resulting articles were not only riddled with errors, but rife with plagiarism. And another example, in January, BuzzFeed announced internally that it would use technology from OpenAI to automate the writing of its signature quizzes. And then, because there was so much concern, it came back and said the site is going to remain focused on human-generated journalism. But despite this, 2 months later, BuzzFeed began publishing travel articles written with AI and announced the end of its Pulitzer-winning news operation.
So you could argue that the trajectory has already been set, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So, and that's what is interesting also as we analyze what is happening, is what generative AI is doing is not just changing everything, it's accelerating some changes that were already latent and starting and generalizing them. And we were talking about democratization last time. It's also about making those tools more widespread for everyone to use.
And I guess one of the other reasons that these tools are going to be used is simply efficiency. You know, it could be efficient and cheaper for organizations to use them. So given the obvious efficiency benefits of using these technologies to compose stories from information and data it has access to, why would this not become the predominant method of generating more content, more media content, more news content? Why would it not?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely one we need to investigate more. Just wanted to mention some work I've actually been doing with a group of European journalists working in national public radio and television, because we started to design the process of creation of a news story and wondering at which stage human intervention was most required, at which stage AI could be little or largely used. And I'm very happy to share just a few of the key learnings we extracted. But what we recommended is to leverage generative AI as really a new way to interact with information and data that are already built within the articles or the reports. Also to dig into your archives, get access to a full archives of journalistic writing. Also, the other important thing is really to promote responsible generative AI by focusing on automation task rather than creative, and to always retain a human robust oversight. so that we know that there's some human input all along the process, no matter how much or little generative AI is involved. And on top of that, one of the most important recommendation we had is, let's disclaim and let the audience know when and where the news provider is using AI, and always keep the best interest of the audience at heart. Also be aware of the policies, guidelines, and code of ethics of your news organization, if you're a journalist, but also of the generative AI tools. Not all the tools have the same requirements in regards to ownership, authorship, and copyrights. And of course, provide feedback within your news organization, so that we can push forward best practices by using, kind of crowdsourcing. And on top of those recommendations, because you were asking of why wouldn't it be the predominant method, I'm thinking I would add another risk that I was brutally made aware of by using those tools myself, and that I compare to the Larsen effect. Like this amplification of noise until it becomes really painful to your ears. So what happens when content, like new content, is generated out of generated content itself, which is itself based out of other generated content? Like after a few generations, what is the percentage of human human creativity present in the final output? And researchers actually found that as we go after generation and generation of contents, there are some irreversible defects in the resulting models, and we call it model collapse. It's difficult to have the model unlearn. And a similar concept that you've probably heard about is generative inbreeding.
Yep.
And it was so it was pinpointed by Louis Rosenberg, and mainly it's to describe a similar phenomenon of qualitative human-generated content being degraded over time, over generations, after multiple AI transformation. And I would say that's probably something that could be hindering the acceleration of the development, or at least pushing us to develop more regulation about it, more safeguards. And as he's saying, and once again, if I may quote him, because he said much better than I could, he says, from an evolutionary perspective, first generative LLMs and other generative AI systems were trained on a relatively clean gen pool of human artifacts, using massive quantities of textual, visual, and audio content to represent the essence of our cultural sensibilities. But as the internet gets flooded with AI-generated artifacts, there is a significant risk that new AI systems will train on data sets that include large quantities of AI-created content. This content is not direct human culture, but emulated human culture with varying levels of distortion, thereby corrupting the gene pool through inbreeding. And this is really discomforting when you start to see, like in Google's top results, when you conduct a Google search, you see sentences that resurface from generative AI hallucinations. Because what happens is, after they've asked Bard or ChatGPT or Claude, authors reproduce answers without always fact-checking in their articles. And these non-verified articles, sometimes even in prestigious reviews like magazines like Forbes or HBR, and all over LinkedIn. And then these articles are multi-referenced so that they appear in the top results of Google search. So now you conduct your search, you want to verify something that ChatGPT is telling you. And what you see is another ChatGPT replies, but that ended up being at the top of Google's results. So it's really asking us, how can we verify information again? So I'd invite you really to be cautious. And if you want to know more, I wrote a small article on this, and I invite you to read it.
Do you know what the thought that immediately popped into my mind is it's interesting how we're becoming concerned about the validity, the quality of generative AI content, and it feels quite similar to the erosion of cultural diversity around the world that humanity has has mismanaged, if you like. And it's odd, isn't it, that the machines are almost replicating what humans have done around cultural diversity, but with content diversity. And I know the machines at the moment are being kind of taught to do it by humans, but you know what I mean? It's a really fascinating parallel, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's really an opportunity also to see it the other way around. Like maybe we could kind of develop a collective intelligence approach. I think you had something to say about it.
Yes, yeah. Very, very nicely prompted. Because, yeah, I was going to mention that there seems to be an opportunity for us to take a collective intelligence approach. I mean, you've been talking about kind of human supervision of generative AI content. And Nesta defines collective intelligence as something that is created when people work together, often with the help of technology, to mobilize a wider range of information, ideas, and insights to address a challenge. And that got me thinking that actually that's really similar to the approach that you were talking about, really. You know, how do we use human supervision to make sure the content is valid, it's real, we can trust it? And that what we're actually doing perhaps is using the machine to do the drudgery stuff, but the creative stuff remains the realm of humans. It's interesting how these ideas come together, and all of a sudden, collective intelligence makes sense in the context of generative AI.
Absolutely. And this is a very compelling idea, to use these new tools to harness actually our wisdom of crowd. It feels like we've been talking about that concept, and now we can implement it through those tools. I haven't investigated it as such, but I see two possible challenges that we will need to take into account and that are at the core of current conversations in the journalistic profession and in what news in the digital age means. The first one is around echo chambers. And the fact that we tend to surround ourselves with people with similar beliefs, so that a crowd tends to amplify or reinforce persisting beliefs and bias by communication and repetition inside the closed system. So achieving a real diversity is still a challenge at large. And there has always been a tension in media between complete neutrality of media, like aggregating news from a plurality of sources and perspectives, and on the other hand, perfectly customized news based on your interest and defined criteria, customized criteria, which tends to reinforce your personal beliefs. So the bonding with peers sharing similar ideas and values, I would believe, is so strong in human societies that creating a perfectly diverse crowdsourced view of the news really still seem a bit utopian to me. And I would say the second challenge that we meet as we engage in democratizing content creation, and it's really not to be underestimated, but it's content moderation. And this is probably one of the most difficult tasks that humans have to deal with today in this digital landscape, because people conducting content moderation of visual content rarely stand the job for more than a few weeks. They are exposed to tagging hundreds of hurtful and harmful images and videos every day. And this job has not been satisfyingly automated yet. So in a future where we would turn our back to major media corporations to favor like crowdsourced information and social generated information, when we need to think about who bears the responsibility of the content produced, who moderate it, who is going to conduct that content moderation.
Fascinating. Goodness, Sylvia, we have covered some ground, haven't we? And I think everything that we've spoken about in these first two episodes is still pointing us towards the future. We're kind of on this journey. We've seen the trajectory. We've looked at a couple of different potential alternatives of direction of travel into the future. But what I'd like to do now is to get into the three scenarios that I know you've got to speak about. So let's take a leap forward into 2050. And can you start by describing these three scenarios and talking a bit about how the world of media and news might have changed?
Absolutely, Steve. And I love that we engage in really like stretching our time horizon, because there seem like it's a complicated landscape to decipher today. But we've been trying to capture those changes and to extrapolate three possible scenarios. So warning here, they might be discomforting, but we would love to hear your feedback on this. So the first one, we call it frugal AI. So this first scenario is one of, let's say, constraint for good. Following the generative AI hype of the beginnings, concerns around ethics, bias, privacy, safety, education, child protection, and our relationship to truth have led us to intensified regulatory effort. This hasn't stopped innovation, but this has induced the development of AI tools in a more responsible way. Generative AI content is not omnipresent, and disclaimers enable individuals to identify AI agents and distinguish it from AI-generated content. Moderation is also better, as policies are favoring democracy and safety. And in this scenario, sustainability is at the core of innovation as well. It's completely intricated. We teach children to not overuse technology for entertainment, nor overly conduct search and chat with AI bots if there's not a core need. Companies have maybe usage quotas, and each search is attached to a carbon footprint, so we are aware of the associated cost for the environment. We rely on a new series of devices, such as the Echo Tablet, a low-consumption device powered by solar energy. Sorry. Our second scenario, we call it the tech supercharged world. So this second scenario is more on the brink of collapsing, maybe close to a cyberpunk scenario, but maybe not as dystopian and extreme, as people value technology and harness it mostly to simplify our lives and free us from repetitive tasks. But there's still a lurking risk that we lose control. We live in a world mostly submitted to technology, with lots of immersive experiences, virtual worlds to retreat to, interactive assets everywhere we go, overlays of information and augmented media on top of the real world. Multiple devices, lighter and smarter headsets, miniaturized wearables with sensors and trackers, but also gestures and haptics to interact with our homes, cars, workplaces, and cities. We live in a sort of symbiosis with this AI-led environment. We are surrounded by a profusion of AI-generated assets, books, TV shows, phone operators, so that it tends to be overwhelming. New mental health syndromes emerge. In this world, journalism is completely automated, even information collection. Our newsreader is probably a robot. We even have a newsfeed for what happens in the metaverse, which is different from the real-life newsfeed. We opt for a specific view of the world, maybe. Let's say the CNN view of the world, the Fox one, the BBC one. Now that most of the work is automated, a popular way to earn revenue is to harness your identity, to monetize your personal data, biometrics, face, your voice, your style, your humanity. So that now the logic is the other way around. Machines need us. They need to be fed with real human components to ensure it simulates humanity with enough accuracy and empathy, to go against that inbreeding phenomenon we just described. This is the reign of the identity economy. A possible consequence is that a category of people feel overwhelmed and confused. Maybe they retract from any online or digital interaction. They stop connecting at the global scale and refocus on real-life, local interactions or tech-free bubbles. If this group of Luddites gets large enough, we might see the rise of a true two-speed world, or hackers might want to completely turn down this uber-human version of the internet to bring down the all tech-dominated system and end the era of the global village. And our third scenario which we call the reality continuum, is more in the continuity of our current world, more like a growth or probably transformation at some point scenario. The tech world is not crushing our physical reality. We live along a continuum of reality, and we learn to make the distinction. Generative AI continues to develop, and a variety of use cases make our life easier. Content is dispensed throughout the day on a variety of media, online, offline, in the metaverse, via robotics. Perhaps we have a companion robot and AI agents on our social apps. But the important element in this scenario is that we get used to interacting with those similarly as today we know how to make the difference when we talk to Alexa versus when we talk to our children or our neighbors. Integrated detectors also help us identify if content is human versus AI generated. We update them as we update antivirus software, and companies we trust help us to apply filters the same way our email providers help us filter spams and so on. So when in doubt in phone conversations with our loved ones, maybe we use AI safe words to confirm our identity. It's all about normalizing artificial intelligence, making it part of human life, making it familiar, safe, and reassuring. We might have plural identities along the continuum, at home, at work, online, in the metaverse, but these are associated with different levels of protection. Perhaps we sell and harness an avatar, but our private identity remains anonymous. Information comes in a variety of forms, from human-generated to automated. But here again, we learn how to distinguish, the same way we learn to make the difference between what we read in a newspaper, on a blog, on social media, between an expert analysis, a political point of view, or an influencer pitch. This becomes part of our education curriculum, and institutions help us make informed choices, like you, Steve.
Sylvia, they were absolutely extraordinary, and I want to thank you so much for bringing those scenarios to the podcast. And to any listeners or viewers out there, we really want to know what you think about those scenarios. Is there one you feel is more likely than the other? Is there a desirability about one or the other? Or are there components of those three scenarios that could perhaps come together to create something that is more desirable and more likely? And what we're going to do is we're going to gather that feedback up. And when we come together again in the third of the 3 episodes in this short mini-series, we're going to look very specifically about the idea of the identity economy within the context of these 3 scenarios. Sylvia, that's been absolutely fantastic. So lovely to have you on the podcast again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Steve. That was a pleasure for me. Thanks so much.
And thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Do let your friends and colleagues know about the Informing Choices mini-pod. Don't forget to send us your feedback and look out for us on the next episode coming very soon.